Today I'm showing you my process for setting up and painting a still life of some peppers, and why natural objects are a great choice for practice. Number 1. Setting up the reference. When I practice drawing, I like to use natural objects because they're more forgiving than man-made ones. Every pepper looks a little different, and so it doesn't matter if your drawing isn't an exact match. For this setup, I picked 2 peppers. I usually prefer odd numbers or asymmetrical compositions because they feel a bit more interesting to the eye. That's why I cut one of the peppers in half. So now I have 3 different shapes to work with. A whole pepper and the 2 half peppers, and also the interiors of both of those peppers. Even if I don't end up using all of them, it just gives me more options when playing with the composition. I would say if you're trying to decide on a composition and you're not sure what to go for, I would use one of the composition rules. So for example, in this instance, I use rule of thirds, but you could use leading lines. If you stick to those rules of composition, it will help you get a reference picture that you're happy with. Number 2, composing the shot. I'm spending some time here moving the peppers around, trying different arrangements, showing the seeds, turning them in different directions, deciding whether to use both of the pepper halves or just one. Number 3, preparing for the drawing. After picking the photo, I'm uploading it into a free art tool called ArtGrid, which is really great. You just upload your image, it overlays it with a grid, and it really helps when you're trying to get your proportions right. I traced over the grid using a bright blue colour so that my guidelines would stand out clearly. I also made a blue outline of the basic shapes that were in the image. I did this so that, it would be more clear when I come to do my own drawing where one part of the pepper starts and the other stops. Now I'm making a small colour palette based on the photo. If I'm totally honest, I don't usually do this step, but it is quite helpful. And doing this step helps me see the colours for what they are and out of context. Sometimes colours can sort of trick you and you think that they are one thing and you pull them out of context and actually they look totally different. So this step, if you're not so confident with your colour mixing or not so confident with looking, basically, I would really recommend this step, especially if you're going into a big painting. You don't want to start mixing and get your colours wrong. You're better off doing the colour palette first so you get a bit of an idea. Having the swatches means that you have something to compare the colours that you mix against whilst you're painting, and that helps with accuracy and decision making. You might know that you want to make a painting that has higher chroma, for example, or you know you want to make it more vibrant. By having that colour palette, every time you mix a colour, you can decide that you're going to make it a bit more vibrant or make it a bit more pastel. But you kind of can mix to where your swatch is and then adjust from there. So that's really helpful. Number 4, starting the painting. So I'm opening the photo here in Adobe Fresco and setting up a matching grid inside the app. So you can see here me clicking on the sidebar and setting up my grid that matches. Using my Apple Pencil to sketch the peppers. So I'm using an Apple iPad Pro 2020. I've got the smaller one, I think it's 12 inches, and an Apple Pencil 2nd generation. This is actually my second one. I did so much drawing that I wrecked my first Apple Pencil, so it's hard times. But anyway, this is my new one. But you can see here I'm starting to sketch the peppers. I'm basically just following the grid and following the proportions, and I'm double checking what I'm doing, and also I'm using my pencil to help me measure, which is something you do when you're drawing from life. The grid method for me really just helps getting the base proportions right. Some people really hate the grid method, but honestly for me I just feel like it's another tool, so you should use whatever works best for you. And if you're not that confident with proportions, I think it's super helpful. So ignore the haters, use the grid method. Number 5, blocking in colour. So I start using Fresco's live brushes, and I mainly use the oil paint glaze brush, and I like to block in the darker tones first and build up to the lighter tones. With Fresco, the paint blends quite easily, which can be great. If you don't place your colours down on your canvas quite separately, they can get quite muddy and start dragging into each other, and then you don't have as much definition. So I would say at this stage I'm trying to keep the shadows, midtones and highlights fairly separate, and then I'll blend them together later with one of the blending brushes. So number 6, blending and refining. Once the basic colours are blocked in, I use the smudge tool to gently blend the transitions between these areas, making the pepper look smoother and more natural, more painterly. I like to use the canvas blender brush, as this to me just makes it look and feel much more like a real painting. Again, some people get a bit angsty about the idea of a digital painting looking like a real painting, and I just feel like I would like it to look like a real painting. I wish I had the patience, the space, the will to want to paint with oil paints. But number one, I'm not cleaning up the tarps and the oil. I'm not stinking up my flat with white spirit. I need to be able to put my work away. I don't want to have massive canvases everywhere. So do what you want to do. And I think there's nothing wrong with trying to make your digital paintings look like real oil paintings. You don't have to hate oil painting and what oil painting looks like, and you can want to have a similar version but just cleaner. But anyway, so moving on back to my smudging. So at this stage I'm also adding a background, partly because it's helping to set the mood for the pepper, it's helping to set it into its environment, and partly because I honestly just needed a little brain break. I think you can get really bogged down in these drawings, but for me, doing something like the background, which is a really easy win, is like, I feel like I'm making lots of progress, and I am making progress, but it means I'm still working on it. I'm making progress. That makes my brain happy without having to just be like bogged down in all the details. Sometimes I do feel like I have to take a step back and just do something else, or even just draw a different part of a drawing, because I just think I just get too bogged down by it. That's my advice if you feel the same way by bigger things, by bigger projects. I usually pick a complementary colour for my background, so like green for red, for example here I would usually pick like a green or a tealy colour for the background, but I actually went for this like sepia-y kind of like earthy tone, and I ended up preferring that in this instance, so I just went for it. It's kind of giving like earthy vibes, but I'm cool with that. I think that's fine. So I did some shading, but you can see I filtered through lots of different colours before I landed on, or different variations I guess of the colours before I landed on this one. Number 7, adding layers and highlights. So after the first pass, you can see here I'm adding new layers to bring back some of the brightest highlights and some of the darkest shadows. So this is particularly something with Fresco. You can't really, I haven't found, and I may be wrong, but I haven't found a dry down button. In Art Set 4 there's like a little fan and you can press it and it basically like dries your paint down, so you can layer new paint on the top of it, but I haven't found that in Fresco. So the best way I found to sort of deal with this is to just make a new layer and then you can blend it into the layer below. So that's quite helpful. It's really important for me to add back in the really high highlights and the quite low lights, because it just adds more contrast and more depth. And for me, that's what makes something come to life and what makes it jump out of a page. So I think that's really, really important to not skimp out on highlights. And also, I would say highlights are always brighter than you expect them to be. I feel like I always think they're, like a more subtle colour, but no, a lot of the time they are like white. Number 8, painting the cut pepper interior. So now I'm painting the inside of the pepper, and it was a little bit more challenging than I was expecting. It's quite a subtle mix of colours, particularly the sort of like root of the stem was quite tricky, because it's kind of like pastely, kind of peachy, kind of like greeny, but so it took a lot of tweaking and going back and forth before I was in a position where I was happy and it didn't end up too yellow or too saturated. And I added some texture to it by moving my brush back and forth, and again adding back in those highlights right at the top of that stem part is where it really comes to life for me. So, and also I was adding, another tricky part of this was adding texture to the inside of the main like fleshy part of the pepper. To do this, I added a new layer and then dabbled some lighter highlight colours and then sort of did like a swishy S motion with my pencil, and that helped to create dimply highlighty texture. I don't really know how else to describe it on the inside of the open half of the pepper, so I think that worked out really well. So I think this like central part for the seeds and I guess it is the stem at the base of the stem, the inside part with the hole, like that whole section didn't necessarily come out exactly like the photo. I think when I'm painting, although I'm painting with a reference, I'm not trying to make it photorealistic, and I think don't get caught up with making it like totally, a carbon copy of the reference. I think that's one of the joys of using a natural object rather than a man-made object. And also, if you want to be someone who can do hyper realistic images, that's great. There is no pressure to do that. It's all skills, it's all practice. Don't feel disheartened if it's not an exact carbon copy of what's in front of you. It doesn't need to be. So you can see me here as well, adding in the like little seeds, and this took me a few tries to get the colourings right. They were kind of too yellow and too green, but eventually I got there and I was happy with the colours. Again, you know, they're not exactly the same, it's not a complete copy, but it just has the same vibe and the same essence and kind of the same impression. Like, you can tell it's that one picture relates to the other without them being exactly the same. So, and then you can see right at the end here, I'm just adding a few extra highlights, a few extra lowlights, blending some little bits in, just cleaning some parts up, and I'm just sort of following my intuition and like looking at it more as a whole and thinking what little parts need to be changed for it to have the kind of the same essence as my image that I'm drawing from, basically. And then I finished it up and I was really pleased with how this one turned out. My favourite part of the whole thing is the kind of like seedy section like at the base of the stem, and that's probably the part that's the least like photorealistic. So I think it just goes to show you just follow the impression. You're looking constantly at what you're drawing, but you're also taking, you know, a little bit of your intuition with it as well. But I think all of these things kind of come with practice. The more you draw and the more you practice drawing from life, the easier it will become to kind of give an impression of something without totally copying it pixel for pixel. So that was my whole process from start to finish of completing a drawing using Adobe Fresco, using my own reference images. Please let me know what you thought about this process. How much practice do you do in a week? Are you trying to train yourself to draw more photorealistic? Which parts of your art practice are you actively working on at the moment? I think for me, I am forever working on my proportions. I was really happy in the end with how this pepper turned out, and maybe you could follow along and paint with me. If you do, please tag me in your picture. I would love to see your version of this pepper. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you will stick around for a video in the future. Thank you. Bye bye.